Hello and welcome to Message Makers. This is where we uncover the knowledge and experience that sits in the comms industry. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Tracy Goode from Fujitsu. We're going to be talking about working across cultures, professional development in comms, and building relationships and engagement. Hi Tracy. You've spent a lot of time in one organisation, but you've moved around roles within that organisation. So how has that shaped the way that you communicate, Tracy?
It's obviously given me an appreciation for what life feels like for a lot of our employee audience. You know, I've worked in service delivery, marketing, I've worked on HR programs, legal and commercial, I've worked with our engineers. So it's given me a real understanding for how communication can be received by those different groups of people. And I think it's probably given me an aspect of realism. You know, as a communicator, I realise that actually not everything that we put our effort into sharing with people is applicable to everyone or of interest to them. So yeah, it's given me an element of realism.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I started my career working in retail, worked in a bookshop, and then I worked in a contact centre before I kind of moved into comms. And I think, everybody should have some experience of either retail, hospitality, or a contact centre, because the pressures that you're under are completely different to kind of working in a more of a kind of back office type role. And I think you're absolutely right. When you're kind of working on communicating something, just understanding what those pressures are and how people consume that content, or the opportunities that have to consume that content, can make such a difference to how you plan and put things together. So I couldn't agree more. What, you know, if somebody hasn't had that experience of working on the front line, like how would you approach that?
You know, building yourself a good network. So when you are interacting with people from other parts of the business, take the opportunities to, you know, see if you can get yourself invited along to some meetings that take place in other parts of the business, and definitely try and do some of these day in the life of type experiences. I've done it myself. I've sat in cars with engineers. We've gone round and done, you know, calls going into different customer environments. And I think it's really useful to, one, see what they do, and sometimes see the lack of contact opportunities that people have. You know, myself, when I've been a service delivery manager before, one day I could be with a rail account based in London. Another day I could be straight up in Glasgow with another customer. And when you're in those kind of environments, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to sit like I do now on my bottom at a laptop at a desk most of the time, where I have the luxury of being able to go and check out our intranet, keep myself up to date with emails, you know, be available to Viva engaged communities and Teams chats. And people who work in those different environments just don't have that same opportunity. And I think it's really important to get that visibility.
No, absolutely. And it just gives you an understanding of kind of where those opportunities are. We did some work with a logistics client, and every Christmas, which is our kind of busiest period, like everybody spent time loading trucks up in the warehouse, and it just, you kind of understand the pressure.
Brilliant.
Understand the pressures people are under. So the organisation that you've spent, I mean, not that long, but a few years in, is Fujitsu, which is a Japanese headquartered organisation. So what differences does that make working for an organisation that's headquartered in Japan? Is there a different way of working, or like how does that present itself day to day?
Yeah, there is. So we're an organisation of around 113,000 employees, over half of whom are based in Japan. So we're kind of split into Japan and then international, and then we've got regions within international, then countries, then different business areas. So we've got this huge audience, this huge employee population, and within that we've got very, very different cultures. And I don't just mean different cultures in a business sense. You know, we've got people who have been brought up in very different ways. We've got the different languages. We've got different education systems, and all of these things help shape the culture that people come in to work with. So in terms of working across those cultures, it can be challenging. I mean, it's really, really interesting because, you know, I find myself learning from different cultures all the time, and I find that I have to adapt my communication style on a daily basis. And I think the biggest challenge can be where you're working on a program that involves people across cultures and trying to work out a way to communicate in a way that suits everyone. Because obviously, you know, we've got For example, we have our team in the Nordics. They like to be communicated with through our intranet. So any events, messages, company announcements, they expect to be able to go there each day and they see content there. Where in the UK, we're a bit more hybrid. We have some people who like to read content through emails. We have people who want to go to Viva Engage communities, others who like to go to the intranet. And then we've got in Japan, where we have people who are generally quite conformant and very respectful of hierarchy and very respectful of content that is shared from the corporate headquarters. So we just have this difference, a different approach across the different groups, cultures, countries. And personally, I find it really interesting working with Japan because I have to really slow down. I'm quite bubbly, lively. I ask a lot of questions. I talk quite quickly, and that can be somewhat challenging in an environment where, with colleagues in Japan, they're generally very calm, polite, respectful. And I'm not saying that people who are not Japanese are not those things, but they just have a very calm way of working. It's interesting, it's challenging, and I think the biggest challenge is this piece of where you're working across cultures and trying to find a balance that suits the different cultures that you're working with.
It's interesting because at the surface level, you kind of assume it's just about kind of versioning for languages and that's kind of it. But when you kind of drill down to it, there's so much more to it than that. Has there been a time when kind of those cultural differences have really caught you off guard at all?
I don't know about off guard, but I'll use an example with a different country actually. So when I worked in legal and commercial, I was involved in setting up a UK shared service, in which we had a team of people who would go through contracts, extracting obligations, dependencies, and that's how we would help manage a contract going forward. So it'd all go into a timeline type thing. So we had a UK shared service and we had a commercial shared service offshore based over in India. And with the initial interactions, I hadn't really given an awful lot of thought to how it might be interacting with people from a different country. And I'm talking sort of 15 to 18 years ago. So it's a long time ago. And obviously a lot of things have changed. But I found that they often would say yes to something and agree and nod in a meeting, again, because they don't want to let people down and they want to be agreeable. So they say yes to everything. And then a week would pass. We'd come to have a meeting again, talk about some of the things that had, trying to talk about, progress, things that had changed. And then I'd find that not very much had changed. And then myself as the head of the UK shared service and the lady who was head of the offshore one, we came to realise actually this was a cultural thing. So what we did was we actually went over and spent time there and we did some open workshops and we sort of briefed them to say, it's okay to speak up. That's what we want you to do. Let's talk about how we can work better together. So we did a series of workshops over a week and we ended up with like a service improvement plan at the end of it.
It's a kind of mismatch of expectations, I guess, and an experience. Yeah, and when we called before, you kind of talked about cultural theory and kind of how that helps to reduce some of that friction and misunderstanding.
As you know, I'm doing an MA in internal communication management, and one of the modules that we've covered already is involved looking at culture. So I've done a lot of reading about that, and it's just given me the awareness that actually we are different and we do work differently, and that's okay. And actually, as I said earlier on, it's not about just the corporate culture. It's about the fact that we have been brought up very differently and in very different environments, and just having that awareness helps make me feel more comfortable in the way that I am and be more accepting of the way that other people are. And one thing that can be quite challenging is where, for me, 1 minute I can be interacting with a Japanese colleague and then, 2 minutes later I can be interacting with a Portuguese colleague, and the styles and approaches are very different. So I'm constantly having to think, what's the most effective way to interact with the person that I need to interact with at this moment in time.
When you can think about like stakeholder management, like you adapt your communication style and kind of how you present depending on your stakeholder, and you kind of get to learn how different individuals communicate. I guess it's just kind of taking it to that bigger picture and kind of looking at it at a cultural level as well as an individual level.
It is, and you just touched on the module that we're studying at the moment, which is around influence, being a trusted advisor, business partnering. And that's really getting us to look at exactly those things in terms of how you adapt your style based on the stakeholder you're working with. So one thing that I'm looking at the moment is I'm doing some retrospective thinking myself at the moment around effective senior relationships that I've had with people, and then ones that have been less effective. And I'm starting to think about, well, why have some of those things worked well in one case, but maybe not worked so well in another? And the thing that I'm finding is it's because of needing to understand the stakeholder more than myself or my expertise. So I'm finding that quite interesting at the moment to look at myself as a consultant, as in an external consultant to a stakeholder, as opposed to somebody working in the same organization.
Circling around then to the masters. So you're currently studying a master's in internal communication with the IOIC. So what prompted you to kind of formalize your communication practice in that way?
So first off, our head of internal comms shared with the team that he was really keen to see more professionalization across the function. That prompted me to then look into the IOIC and what they had available to offer. So I started to have a look and join in with some of their free webinars. I was able to access some of the materials that they have on their website. And then I started, so through joining some of these webinars, I found out about the MA. So I looked into that a bit more and had a chat with my line manager. We spoke about it. She was really keen, supportive, thought it'd be a great thing to do. And then I just looked into applying, did the application. I had to be interviewed by the course director. You have to submit a portfolio of work. You kind of get interviewed about all of that. And then I was offered a place and waited for the start. So I started in November last year, and I finish in December this year. And I find myself all the time using snippets that I've read, little pointers in conversations, and I have a weekly one-to-one with my line manager. I'm frequently chucking stuff in that I've read about that week or that I've read about previously. And then she does the same with me. She speaks to me about sense making and how she's applying it to some of the activities that she's working in. So it's helping professionalize more than just me. There have been topics where I've spent time using. I can't really use the assignments specifically from the course, but what I can do is adapt that content. So I've been able to extract loads of content from the assignments, then turn it into decks that I've then presented back to our team for them to sort of think about and use themselves, and also use with some of their stakeholders as well.
I'd be interested to know, has the masters validated that, or has that changed that, or what impact has that had on kind of the way that you would approach kind of planning a piece of communications or a campaign?
So it's given me access to models that, I probably did many of the steps within the models anyway, but sort of hadn't realized that this was like a defined structure that I was following. Content that we might put as a global news story on our intranet, that could just be an awareness for everyone, but not everybody needs to take action on it. So you've got a different group, a different audience group and a different way of communicating with the audience group that you actually want to do something with the information that you're sharing. So the models just really help you kind of think a bit more clearly about what you're communicating and how, and specifically thinking about the audiences and also the stakeholders that you're working with.
And was there any kind of key moment where those theories and frameworks kind of really helped you make sense of a challenge you were facing in the workplace?
I can see that there are things that I could have done differently and would do differently, with certain stakeholders in the future. So although I can't fix some of the ways that I might have worked previously or how stakeholders may have worked previously, what it enables me to do is to carry that knowledge forward so that going forward I can apply some of the techniques certainly around influencing and apply some of those going forward to hopefully have more enriched relationships with some stakeholders going forward.
Great. And I think that kind of stakeholder management piece is so important, isn't it? You can have the best comms plan in the world, the best ideas in the world, but if you kind of can't get your stakeholders on board with it, it's for nothing, right?
Yeah, and they need to be comfortable. When we're asking stakeholders to be involved in activities like town halls, doing videos, standing up. Not everybody is a great speaker. Just because someone is in a senior position doesn't mean that they're the best communicator. So it's about understanding what those people are comfortable with. Some people are really comfortable in writing. Therefore, they're really comfortable maybe doing blogs and putting something that they've got time to think about, prepare, structure, instead of being, on the spot at the front of a room. And that's okay. So it is really just about making sure you understand what works best for your stakeholder, what their drivers are, and then thinking about, as like an ICBP, how you can best support them in delivering the messages that they need to deliver to your audiences in a way that then works for the audience, and in a way that business partners can help tailor content further to their more local audience.
And so, like, sometimes stakeholder management is saying no, right? Like, everybody thinks they're an amazing communicator, and sometimes the role of the business partner is to actually say, no, that's not the right way to do it. Here's the data to back it up. I think having that ability to say no, particularly to be able to say no without people realizing that's what you've said, is a bit of an art form, really.
Yeah, and you've just touched on data there, so that's something that's really helpful from the reading from reports from the IOIC, the IC Index, Gallagher's State of the Sector. All of those types of reports and data now are really useful to use with some of those senior stakeholders, because you're going then beyond the, well, I've worked like this in the past, or this type of approach has worked in the past, and my gut feeling is we should communicate in this way. When you can present to them the data that says, actually, the IC Index has just been released for this year, hasn't it? And it's just said that over half of employees have lost trust in their CEOs. So, to present that back to a CEO, I think that's quite powerful to be able to use that data with them. And I think, they're hopefully a bit more willing to listen then when you can use that data and the models, and to show them how things have worked and how things work in other organisations as well.
I think that's the key bit, isn't it? It's kind of the data to back up what's happening within your organisation, and the models to kind of back up the theory, rather than it just relying on gut feel from either their side or from the communicator's side. So yeah. When we spoke earlier, and you mentioned it earlier as well, the concept of sense making. So I think you said that's really important to you. What is the concept of sense making, just for anybody who doesn't know?
So it's by a guy called Carl Weick, and there are 7 principles to it: identity, retrospective, enactive, social, extracted cues, ongoing, and plausibility. And all of those parts of sense making are like pieces of a journey that people go on when they receive some new information, when they're going through a change. Let's think about our audiences and think about how they're going to receive that. So, when they hear certain words, when they see certain words, they're automatically going to be, they do this subconsciously, they're automatically going back and thinking, well, when I heard that word before, so for example, cost efficiencies, when I heard that phrase cost efficiencies before, at some point further down the line, we ended up with redundancies. So is that something that I need to be concerned about? And before people have even read, the rest of a message or heard the rest of it, their minds are already off thinking about something else. So we do need to be careful about, at the different points, how you communicate something, and to be really precise and really deliberate with what content a message contains, but also be mindful of not communicating, because where people don't communicate, that also gives a message. So people also go on that same sense making journey when they're not hearing something, because then they start relating to, well, silence last time meant this, therefore what may be happening what may be happening in the future. So, and it's about giving people opportunities to have some engagement. So introducing some two-way dialogue, so that yes, there may be a message, it could be an easy message or a difficult one, but yes, there's a message coming down the line, but then give people the opportunity to ask questions about it, to interact, to understand. And again, not always to be on the spot, give people time to go away and think and bring a topic back up again.
I think that point around not communicating is communication as well really resonates. I remember there's been a few times where we've supported clients communicating through an M&A process or a merger process, and there was one particular campaign we were working on, and we created a piece of content that was all about gun jumping, which is a kind of technical term around you can't communicate certain things during a mergers process. So there's a whole piece of communication around we can't tell you anything, and the reason is this legal term gun jumping, but that doesn't mean that you should start panicking. We're not saying anything because legally we're not allowed to. And I think it was just recognizing that at that point in the process, that if you weren't to say anything, that would lead to, kind of gossip and rumor and all the rest of it, and just actually kind of filling that space and going, this is why we're not saying anything. It's not because things are happening in smoke-filled dark rooms that we don't want you to know about. Is because legally we're not allowed to do anything at this point. So I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and I imagine in that situation that the communications then will have come across as being really authentic, because yes, yes, there's stuff you can't say, but at least you were being honest upfront and sort of setting your stall out and letting people know and giving them a timeline. And I think it's better to do that than do the saying nothing.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And then you mentioned earlier about kind of some of the stuff you've learned, you kind of dropping into meetings with your manager. But I think when we caught up before, you're kind of sharing a lot of that knowledge around your team as well, and kind of filtering that out. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how has there been have you seen a difference in the way that your team communicates as well as the way that you communicate now with all the learning that you're sharing?
I think people are more mindful of how they communicate, and take that sort of step back to think about how they're communicating across the different groups, across the different cultures, and it's just about having that awareness. As I said, a lot of people who work in comms, they a lot of people fall into it, or they come into it through through a different type of role, or they've had it as part of one role and they've moved into it. So I think it's just about people having that awareness of some of these tools and techniques available to them that they can then use with their stakeholders. In our team, we've got junior members of communications staff right the way through to the strategic trusted advisors who work with CEOs. So we've got quite a mix. So I'm not sure which bits are as useful at which end of the scale, but certainly it's helpful to have it front of mind, and also act as a reminder. So to those who are more experienced, just to act as a reminder that there is stuff that they can use.
Yeah. And then one of the things that I enjoy about my job is I get to go into lots of different organizations in different industries, and you kind of see that people are facing a lot of the same challenges. The detail of how they present themselves might be different, but kind of broadly they're facing a lot of the same challenges. You studying as part of a cohort with other communicators in different industries, how has that kind of influenced, and what have you learned from that?
I've learned that we feel some of the same pain, which it's not necessarily a good thing, but I think it's comforting to some degree to know, I've been at Fujitsu for nearly 27 years, so it's been a long time. So my exposure to what goes on in my organization, it's meant that I haven't always had an appreciation for what life can be like for people in other organizations. I've been in this one for so long. So it's interesting to hear that irrespective of organisation size, that people do have some of the similar challenges. So we have got differences, but then we have these challenges of how do you use the technology, how do you engage with remote workers in particular. It's comforting to know that we have similar issues.
But I mean, it's one of the reasons why we started the podcast, to be honest, is allowing people to stick their head above the parapet and kind of see that it's not just them that are facing some of those challenges. It can be comforting, and I think there's a lot of sharing of knowledge and sharing of experience, and if you can take some of that learning from another organisation and apply it to your own, then it's got to be a help, right? That was kind of one of the motivators behind setting the podcast up, was just to kind of share some of that knowledge and best practice and help people learn from it. I think when we've brought people together from around the comms world in the past, like, everybody's so generous with their experience and with their knowledge. I think this is just a forum to kind of get that out to a wider audience, really.
Yeah, definitely. And we've spoken about, our cohort has spoken about how do we continue to engage with each other going forward, because we are finding it useful. And we obviously sit in sessions and have the tutor-led content, and then there's the informal chats, there's breakout sessions, they put us into work groups, and we do find that really useful to people will actively share content with each other, and to share good ideas, And I hope that we can carry that on going forward. Like I said, we have spoken about how do we retain this community that we've got now, because it's valuable.
So then, kind of just to wrap up, kind of quick fire, closing reflections. What do you think communicators need to get better at over the next 5 years, Tracy?
We absolutely need to work out how to make best use of AI. We're about to release our Fujitsu technology and service vision. A key part of that is becoming AI enabled. It's something that we've been looking at internally for quite some time. I use Copilot a lot. We have our own internal Fujitsu AI as well, and I use that. We use it to help with writing, editing, researching. So we use it in these different touch points to help make us more efficient in certain ways. And I think it's got a place to support us and to make us be a bit quicker at doing some things. And I think we really need to look at how can we embed it in some of our processes to make those smoother and slicker, which then frees up time for internal communicators to be working on those strategic relationships with the key stakeholders, and to be delivering rich relationships with our audiences. So I think we really need to master the art of AI.
I don't think AI can do effective stakeholder management. I mean, maybe we'll get there one day, but
Exactly.
And then looking ahead, what excites you the most about the future of internal comms?
We've got all these channels and we've got so much noise. Employees sometimes don't know where to go for what content, because there's just so much out there. And I even find, feel that myself sometimes. And I think we somehow need to find some quicker, shorter, sharper ways of communicating with people and making communications a bit faster and a bit more digestible. Almost like treating the internal communication role in the same way that we have, the way that we digest information externally, the way we digest information at home. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing more development around that, whether that be employee apps or some new technology that we don't yet know about. But I'm looking forward to seeing some changes there.
I think that's always the case, though, isn't it? Like the consumer technology and consumer channels kind of is always moving ahead faster. It's kind of not as constrained by kind of IT frameworks and procurement and kind of security considerations. And it's interesting from my side, where we work on stuff for internal comms. We also work on kind of marketing, employer brand and social media content as well. That kind of taking those formats and those things that work well for an external audience, wherever that might be, and applying them internally. I think sometimes the technology is kind of the limiting factor there, but I think taking the formats and the ideas can be really effective.
Yeah, and I think there's more to come for our employees. So I mean, look how much technology has changed and moved us on in terms of the way we communicate just since COVID. What a fast, rapid turnaround we had, and all of a sudden, we're not traveling for 4 hours to go to a meeting anymore, because we just hop on and we just do it. And it's only 2026 now. It wasn't like this in 2020, was it?
And this recording, like pre-COVID, this would have been us getting together in a studio somewhere, which would have been lovely, but it kind of it slows everything down, doesn't it? So I remember seeing a quote that was like, 10 years of digital transformation kind of took place in 3 months at the beginning of 2020, and absolutely was
phenomenal.
Yeah. And so last thing then, if there's one thing that you hope listeners take away from your story and experiences, what would it be, Tracy?
I think it's the piece around understanding your stakeholder. So I think, as I see professionals, we have a tendency to think about our audience, our employees, and obviously that's the right thing to do. But let's not underestimate having an equal level of understanding of our stakeholder, because we can't support them and the business at a strategic level until we understand what their real drivers are. So I think it's, nail that piece, nail that relationship with your stakeholder, and then the rest of it flows through to your employees. So start at the top and get that bit right.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it, Tracy. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for inviting me, Owen. It's been lovely to have a chat.
That's it for this episode of Message Makers. Thanks again to Tracy for joining me and for sharing her insight. Don't forget to subscribe on the platform of your choice, and if you've got any questions or suggestions for topics to cover, then do get in touch.